when it's cold, and when it's dark. You probably should have paid the electric bill. Welcome to Better Than Food. I'm gonna tell you a story about a man who was born on August 20th in 1890 in Provincetown, Massachusetts. His name was Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Now, I wanted to actually do a whole coverage on the collected fictions of H.P. Lovecraft, but I found something even better. This little gem. H.P. Lovecraft, Against the World, Against Life. This is by a French author, contemporary French author, my favorite contemporary French author, Michel Houellebecq. Nobody would be more suited for covering this material. This was actually an essay by Michel Houellebecq, written a while back. And Michel Houellebecq has gone on to have an incredible writing career of his own, which we'll come to later in the show. But for now, let's talk about this magnificent duo. Now, I could say that H.P. Lovecraft was a writer of horror and science fiction, but that doesn't really cut it. Lovecraft had a wonderfully happy childhood, and then sometime when he was a late teenager, he felt the slip into reality and didn't do anything for about 10 years. And then he began to write a brand of horror which, to this day, has had more impact on the genre than any other literary figure I can possibly think of. By the way, there was a guy named Stephen King. He wrote the introduction to this book. I don't know, seems like a good guy. Really liked Lovecraft. Lovecraft suffered a lot of the same problems that Edgar Allan Poe had with critics. And that was basically that, after a certain age, after adolescence, after being a teenager, you kind of like dismiss them. Like, oh, I read that when I was a teenager, and I'm older now, I'm ready for real literature, the serious stuff, the real deal. Give me nothing but Joyce and Proust and Virginia Woolf. Yeah, well, you can't easily dismiss Lovecraft. He wrote about fear of the unknown, the fabric tear in reality, where suddenly that which is incomprehensible is revealed, and chaos is illuminated and forever stains the subject who witnesses it. That's kind of the theme in all of his stories. His most famous would be The Call of Cthulhu, which is actually included in this book, along with The Whisper in the Darkness, which is equally terrifying. All of it has to do with, the occult in foreign cities and architecture that is like against geometry and inhuman and doesn't make sense. And it sounds totally cheesy when I'm talking about it, but my God, this shit is scary. I mean, just try reading this alone one night. I mean, like, really, try reading a collection of H.P. Lovecraft stories and not feeling at least just a little bit, anxious. In this introduction that Stephen King writes, he's asking, the question, have you ever scared yourself as a writer? He answers back with another question, which is, have I ever taken a piss? Which, of course you do. The mind. Yeah. The horrifying, the ghastly, the macabre, the mysterious, the foreboding, the infinitely destructive chaos of the universe. That's great. It's fantastic. I mean, you can read this stuff until you're dead. It's so good. It was kind of like lumped into this category called weird fiction. The book seemed marginalized because of that stamp. Oh, this is weird fiction. Another one that actually got thrown into that whole thing was a horror story, which I believe was influential to Lovecraft, which was called The Willows by a man named Algernon Blackwood. Equally good. Some writers that were inspired by Lovecraft were I don't know, Joyce Carol Oates, Tennessee Williams, Flannery O'Connor, many, many, many others. And this guy named Stephen King. While Lovecraft's fiction is incredible and fantastic and extremely impressive and exciting, his life was hardly that. He was a very isolated, lonely individual. He was poor for his entire life. If he was doing work for friends, he wouldn't take the money. He had no interest in it whatsoever. He tried to have nothing to do with it, essentially. Sex, too. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with sex. Something about the human bodies was horrifying to him. He did, however, meet one woman, whom he married, and together they moved to New York, and everything was going fine until she lost her job. And then Lovecraft couldn't get any work, and then he entered extreme poverty. And then he developed this truly morose blend of fear and hatred for everything around him. From his New York experience, Lovecraft developed this heavy strain of racism. An interesting type of racism, the purest form of racism, had nothing to do with nationalism, had nothing to do with pride. It stemmed from one thing: fear. And it shows up all throughout his work. But Lovecraft was horrified of the human race, all races. Truly, there has never been another writer like him. Happiness and joy were not really components of this man's life. And it seems like the only elation that he ever had, the only exuberance of his existence, really came through privately through his writing. And Houellebecq was able to articulate the technique he believed that was used to approach this sort of writing. I'll read it to you. Attack the story like a radiant suicide. Utter the great no to life without weakness. Then you will see a magnificent cathedral, and your senses, vectors of unutterable derangement, will map out an integral delirium that will be lost in the unnameable architecture of time. Better than food. There are so many more anecdotes to talk about, but truly, I mean, it's worth picking up the book and finding them in there, and clearly, and Houellebecq articulates them much better than I can. So get some H.P. Lovecraft, get some Michel Houellebecq, hell, get some Stephen King too. And always remember what John Waters said: if you go home with someone and they don't have books, don't fuck them. Have a great night. Happy Halloween.